Welcome to Past Theory YT. Real quick, if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Okay, so in today's explainer, we are looking at a 70-year cycle of conflict that finally reached a terrifying boiling point on February 28th, 2026. We're going to explore exactly why this fire started, how it completely changed the world, and what the lessons of this 2026 conflict tell us about the future of global power. Let's start with a staggering number, 20. Over 20. That is how many Iranian nuclear facilities were targeted in a massive, highly coordinated pre-dawn airstrike on that late February morning in 2026. This was a joint operation, U.S. B-2 bombers flying alongside Israeli F-35 fighter jets, and it significantly degraded those sites. I mean, this marked the absolute most severe military escalation we'd seen in the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq War. Which brings us to a really crucial historical mystery. Looking at the smoking ruins of those facilities, you have to ask, how did a nation that was once considered the West's ultimate island of stability in the Middle East, and actually, fun fact, the second Muslim nation to ever recognize Israel, how did it become the center of a global war? Well, to answer that, we can't just look at modern politics. We literally have to rewind the clock. Part 1, 1953, Operation Ajax and the Fight for Oil. To really understand the why behind all this chaos, we have to go back to 1953 and look at a man named Mohammad Mossadegh. He was Iran's first democratically elected prime minister, and he made a decision that totally shocked the British Empire and permanently altered Iranian history. He decided to nationalize the country's oil industry. See, before this, a British monopoly basically owned everything. They were paying around this tiny 16% fraction of the profits, while many Iranians were living in absolute poverty. Obviously, the British were furious. They organized a global boycott of Iranian oil and ultimately convinced the U.S. that Mossadegh was a secret communist threat to the Cold War balance, setting the stage for a covert overthrow. And this leads to a wild piece of history. It is now exactly midnight. That seemingly innocent phrase? It was actually a secret code broadcast by the BBC directly to the Shah of Iran to kick off Operation Ajax. This was a joint CIA and MI6 mission, and they literally spent thousands of dollars to hire mobs and bribe officials. Driven entirely by Cold War paranoia and a desperate need to secure those vital oil resources, they successfully ousted Mossadegh. Now, before we move on, I want to hear from you guys. Do you think foreign intervention back in 1953 is the primary reason for the tensions we see today? Let us know down in the comments. Okay, part 2, the Shah's era and the pressure cooker. Following that 1953 coup, the Shah was restored to absolute power. He basically transformed Iran into Washington's closest regional partner for the next 26 years. But here's the catch. This whole relationship was built on a deeply unstable foundation of fear. The Shah's rule was enforced by Savak, this brutal secret police force that was incredibly trained by the CIA. By systematically monitoring and silencing political dissent, shutting down opposition parties, and just using ruthless tactics, they created this deadly internal pressure cooker of economic inequality and severe authoritarianism. The citizens' grievances were just compounding, and man, that pressure was bound to explode. Which brings us to part 3, 1979 and the Islamic Revolution. That internal pressure cooker finally exploded with earth-shattering force when Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to lead the Islamic Revolution. The how is totally critical here, especially just the sheer speed of this paradigm shift. It was staggering. Pre-1979, Iran was heavily armed by the U.S., right? They maintained diplomatic ties with Israel. But post-1979, the monarchy completely collapsed, the Israeli embassy was abruptly closed, and this new theocratic Islamic Republic transformed from a staunch ally into a fiercely adversarial geopolitical foe almost overnight. And this new, deep-seated animosity was cemented by a single number, 444. In November 1979, Iranian students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They took 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage and held them captive for a grueling 444 days. This single event permanently severed diplomatic ties, and it etched this deep narrative of mutual distrust that would go on to define U.S.-Iran relations for decades to come. So when we look across the decades, you start to see this direct causal chain forming. It's like a giant, terrifying domino effect from the 1953 foreign intervention that planted the seeds of anti-Western resentment right through the 1979 Islamic Revolution. That distrust just kept carrying over into the modern era, leading directly to the collapse of nuclear diplomacy with the U.S. withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018. All of this history, every single step, directly fueled those devastating 2026 military strikes. Moving right along to part 4, the nuclear diplomacy breakdown. Fast forward a bit. After years of global tension, the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA, attempted to peacefully contain Iran's nuclear aspirations. But after the U.S. unilaterally withdrew in 2018 and slapped back on those maximum pressure sanctions, the breakdown in negotiations was honestly inevitable. And that was due to 3 structural realities. First, Israel's absolute reliance on a preventive military strategy. Second, the U.S.'s dual-track approach, offering diplomacy but simultaneously applying intense coercive pressure. And third, Iran's deep-rooted nuclear nationalism, where they just steadily increased uranium enrichment after the U.S. pulled out. In this kind of environment, deep strategic distrust entirely replaced any hope of diplomatic compromise. Now, to really understand Israel's role in 2026, we have to talk about something called the Begin Doctrine. For Israel, striking Iran wasn't viewed as some random act of malice. It was seen as a mandatory act of state survival. Being a small nation, Israel's strategic policy essentially dictates that they cannot absorb a first nuclear strike. So they must use preventative military action to destroy an adversary's capability to acquire weapons of mass destruction. To them, a nuclear-armed Iran was a literal, existential threat that simply could not be tolerated. Part 5. 2026, a new strategic reality. So, with the diplomatic track officially dead, the military track took over. In February 2026, Operations Roaring Lion by Israel and Epic Fury by the U.S. were launched, officially shifting the entire regional paradigm from containment to outright military confrontation. But here's the thing. Coercive military action without a diplomatic off-ramp, it triggers devastating counter-escalation. Iran immediately fired back with Operation True Promise 4, unleashing a fierce barrage of over 300 ballistic missiles and drones targeting U.S. bases, Israeli airfields, and Gulf ports. The fallout was just catastrophic. We're talking over 5,000 civilian casualties reported, massive global economic disruption, and a total geopolitical realignment. As we look at the ruins of these 70-year-old dominoes, from the chaotic streets of Tehran in 1953 to the massive missile barrages of 2026, we're left with a really sobering reality. The very structures of international security have been fundamentally shaken to their core. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If international treaties, crushing economic sanctions, and forced diplomacy couldn't prevent this catastrophic escalation, how in the world will we successfully govern nuclear proliferation tomorrow?